Hello and welcome to the studio once again. In this video on drawing faces using colour, I'm going to take inspiration from some post-impressionist artists. They are Paul Cézanne, André Derain, Paula Modersohn-Becker and Henri Matisse. And the reason why I've chosen those artists is because they've used colour and shapes in a really interesting and bold way. Here's Cézanne's Standing Nude. This is the earliest of the paintings I've chosen. That was painted in 1898 to 9. All the rest are painted between the years 1905 and 1907. Quite interestingly, and I don't know whether this has anything to do with it, but these were the years of the first Russian Revolution. Could be coincidental, but that historical context is quite interesting. This painting is by Derain and it's called The Dance. I really love these patterns and the strange faces. It's very, very stylised. I found a few paintings by Paula Modersohn-Becker. And here's Matisse. He painted his wife, Madame Matisse, quite a lot in a, maybe quite an unflattering way. I really don't quite know anything about their relationship, and I wonder how she felt about the way he depicted her. Certainly more fun than flattering. And here again is Matisse, a portrait of a young sailor. With very bold and sturdy use of line. Looks as though it's painted quite quickly, and I think a lot of the colour is scrubbed on in a very vigorous way. But the actual pose and proportion and study of the face and the way the young man is sitting, they rely on hours and hours of study and careful drawing. What I plan to do is to do a version of the portrait I did using charcoal, which I've photocopied ready because I'm going to use this photocopy as a template to do the drawing. That I will put in a separate video because it'll be quite a long drawing process. So in this video I will, I'm going to do two versions of that, one in oil pastel, one in chalk pastel. I forget the time to do them both. But what I want to do is to show you the different ways there are of blending the colours using oil pastel and using chalk pastels. And for this I'll just use my stone, which is a great subject for showing transitions in light and shade. As this video is going to be all about colour, I've chosen some colours which include light tones, medium tones and dark tones. And I'm using the pastel paper, which to be honest, I don't use very often for pastel drawing because it's got quite a highly developed texture. I tend to prefer less noticeable texture in my drawings, but I know a lot of people do like to use this paper, so it could be useful to show you how it works. Just try and stop everything falling down. Okay, now pastels, of course, by their nature are thick-ended, so it's quite difficult maybe to control a line. And something that you might like to think about doing is, instead of using pastel to draw an outline, is you could use a pencil, coloured pencil. It will get covered up by the pastel drawing. So, I mean, you can go straight in with pastel, or you can do a pencil line. Notice how I'm making the circle from the ball and socket joint of my shoulder, not with my fingers, not with my wrist, not with my elbow. Okay, so roughly circular shape. As I say, I could easily have made it with any of the colours of pastel, but it's an option. Use a pencil instead. And a coloured pencil, I think, is just maybe more sympathetic to the colourful type of drawing I'm aiming for this time. Now I'm going to use pale colours first. When I'm using pastel, if I put dark colours on first and then try and add pale colours, it's more difficult to keep the pale colours pale because they will mix with the darker colours. So I'm working into the negative area first, because it just so happens that the area around the stone is the lightest part of this subject. So I wouldn't necessarily start with the space around the stone, but in this case it is the lightest area, so it's getting treated first. And I'm just using sort of the side of the end to fill in. You could use the side of the pastel, which creates an interesting, softer, flatter look. But I quite like the squibbly lines that I can get with the end. I'm not being really fussy about keeping to the line I drew in, because it's quite an open and loose style of drawing that I'm getting here. And let's use the yellow for the lightest part of the stone. It's a grey stone, but I'm going to make it colourful, just as with the portrait. I'm not going to try and make natural skin tones. I'm going to go all Matisse, use some bright fun colours. So I'm also using the tone of the paper, which has become sort of some of the mid-tones. And one of the things I can see happening here, which is quite nice, is this is well, it's just a kind of neutral grey paper. But when I put a colour on it, I actually see the grey as the opposite colour to the colour I'm putting on. And I can see this yellow is creating a purplish look. I don't know whether it shows up on the camera, but it's the reason why I chose purple. I've got purple here and blue to do the darker areas, is because they are opposite to yellow, or vice versa. I chose the yellow because it's opposite to purple. And I've also got this brown, which, as I anticipate, will be the mixture between the yellow and the purple. So now the darkest point is just under the stone there, where there's a really dense cast shadow. So I think this is my darkest colour. Just have a look. Is that darker than? Maybe the blue is slightly darker. Put the blue over the purple. Now this is the thing. There's quite a good demonstration in a video I'm going to link to in the description below this video, where the guy is using pastels and he shows very clearly the difference between putting pastel on with hard pressure, with firm pressure, where the colours mix together. I'll try and show you that. So if I put that purple on there and then the yellow on and mix and press on quite hard, the colours mix together. Whereas if I put the purple on the same and then put the yellow on with much lighter pressure, you can cover up one colour with another. It blends less. And as long as you keep working over, it's like a bit extreme really to show you with this such a dark colour underneath. But there's more covering with a very light pressure. Whereas when you press on hard, it moves the colour underneath round. So if you want to cover up a colour with pastel, you reduce the pressure. If you want them to blend together, you press on harder. That I thought was a really useful thing to show. Take a look at his video. Same as with drawing with black and white, drawing with colour, it's important to compare each area of tone to the next area, the area next to it. So I'm noting that the stone is all darker than the background. So in fact what I'm going to do is take a little bit of that yellow out into the background. It's actually moving some of the brown with it as well. And then I'm going to darken this area of stone so that it looks clear against the background. I just wanted a little bit of colour in that white. That's why I'm doing it this way. It also shows how you can move backwards and forwards between light and dark. You can put colour on top of colour, either to cover up colours underneath or to get them to blend in. Pushing harder as well helps to fill in this open texture of the paper. So I can press in a little bit harder there, trying to fill the grain of the paper as well as mix the blue and the brown together. Maybe I'll use more purple actually. Yes, I like that. Too much of the brown I think was a little bit dull. Purple's got a nice character to it. Let's try sort of massaging it in with a round and round movement. Lots of little bits come off the pastel. You can sort of work them into the surface. Just reducing the amount of pressure up here so I don't make this area too dark. But I'm remembering that I can always go back and make it lighter again if I need to. Don't be afraid of going too dark. That's the beauty of pastels, is you can keep going backwards and forwards between light and dark. I think you do need to keep the lightest area quite clean though. As I said, it's quite hard to put a bright highlight back somewhere where you have made it very dark. Pressing on to blend. Let's try with the blue. Light pressure to cover. Pressing on to blend. And light colours are really good for blending as well. They not only lighten the colour they're going on to, but they're very effective blenders. A lot of this lost area here I will regain by using white right at the end. It's quite interesting to deliberately lose a shape in order to find it again with a different colour or a different tone. I'll go back to my this sort of mark rather than that sort of mark. Try different ways of doing it. This is kind of a warm-up exercise. Just find something spherical and try and observe all the different tones as the light changes across the surface, and use that to describe the three-dimensional shape. It'll give you practice with putting pastel on and exploring the different effect you can get with lighter or heavier pressure, and find a range of different marks, play with the surface, develop the familiarity that you need with any medium in order to then use it to draw a picture. So at the moment this stone's got quite a soft edge. It looks a bit out of focus, or maybe more like a ball of wool than a stone. So I shall pay attention to the edge with the tone of the background in order to make it look hard and stone-like. And here, next to that shadow, next to that dark shadow, there's a little bit of light bouncing off the paper, which reflects back onto the surface of the stone. Got multiple light sources in here, so the shadows are going in lots of different directions, but I'm going to simplify that and just choose one. I quite often see people trying to put all the shadows in when there are multiple sources of light. It can get a little bit complicated. Perhaps, again, something you could think about is that what you really want it to look like? You know, with maybe a double shadow over here, for example, and then another paler one over here. But I'm just going to ignore those and select them out and just put a generalised shadow going off in this direction. I quite like losing the edge and then getting it, rediscovering it. Sort of brings all the colours together. You the end of the pastel gets rather dirty. I want to wipe it off every now and then if you don't want to spread that colour into a clean area. That spot there, I can see the tone of the stone is the same as the tone of the shadow, so I can quite safely actually lose that bit of outline completely there. It's interesting, there's often an area where that happens. Everywhere else it's either dark against light or light against dark. But here and there you find a patch where it becomes the same. And unless you look for it, you don't notice it, because your brain sort of fills in the missing, the gap, the missing bit. It's right there, at this side of the shadow as well. So what it's sort of looking like is that there's this yellowish light shining on the stone, and then on the shadow side you get these purple colours. So I've sort of exaggerated what does happen in lighting situations when there's a bit of colour to the light. The shadow has a tinge of the opposite colour in it. So that's something that I think you learn to see that. A little bit of smudging with your finger as well with pastel. Just smudge with your finger as long as you've got enough on the surface. It's not too messy. That's one thing that I really like about it. And I think a lot of people do have difficulty with the messiness of soft pastels or chalk pastels. Chalk and charcoal and soft pastels, they all have a very similar dustiness which comes off on your hands. Indeed, I think some people wear protective gloves to keep their hands clean. Most of this hard pressure I'm putting on now is to fill the texture, to fill the surface of the paper, which is full of little hollows. To me, if there's a lot of that showing, a lot of that texture showing, somehow the work doesn't look solid or finished. But that's just the way I see it. You might see it differently. You might really enjoy that texture. Almost looks like the texture of canvas. But then again, with canvas, I tend to use fine-grained canvas or even smooth board to paint on, because it just suits the way I like to work. Now, I don't think the top of the stone is really dark enough, so what I shall do is I think I'll go in with the purple, maybe even find a lighter purple. Let's try that one. Is that? It's a bit lighter and a bit less reddish too. So I'm just going to go back up there. I'm losing the edge of the stone again. I just want to put in a slightly darker colour, which I'm going to then mix with the yellow to blend it in and lighten it as well. So it shouldn't matter that I've lost the edge of the stone. Should be able to get it back with the white. And if there's a problem putting white on top of a darker colour, you know, I was saying near the beginning it's important to keep the areas that you want brightest. If you want them to stay bright, keep them clean. Well, I haven't here, so I can show you one thing that you can do. If you want to ensure that this, when I put the white back in, that it's nice and clear. What I can do is scrape off. I'm just going to find a tool. I can use a craft knife or one of these scraper tools which you buy for scraper board. I'm just going to take this down for a sec so that I can scrape pastel off the surface right back to the paper. Okay, so when I put the white back on, it's going back onto clean paper and I can get a really nice crisp edge. Don't know if you can see how effective that is. You can really clean up that edge, just brush some of these little bits off. There you are. So, just a warm up and a bit of a play with different mark making techniques, mixing, blending, covering up. And I'll do the same thing with soft pastel, just to show the differences and the similarities. Okay, now something similar, but identifying the differences using soft pastel or chalk pastel. I do use those two terms interchangeably, but it's the same thing. People usually call them soft pastels, and they are chalky, and they're compatible with chalk and with charcoal. I have both in this box. I've got some white pastel and some white chalk. Some of it's better or poorer quality. So the best pastels are really nice and soft. You can tell just by the feel of holding them. That's probably a piece of blackboard chalk, and not much comes off on my hands, but that's a nice piece of pastel, and as soon as I go near it I get lots of dust on my hands. So I will make the drawing of the stone again in a similar way. I'll try and keep my head out of the way this time, and as I say, just identify the differences and the similarities, I suppose, between oil pastel and soft pastel. So same colour paper, same type of paper with that texture on to do the drawing. And to begin with, if you feel the pastel has got too thick an end to do your drawing with, you can use a pastel pencil. Or if you haven't any pastel pencils, a coloured pencil once again to do the drawing. You can use graphite pencils for doing the drawing for both of them, but the bits of drawing that show, that don't entirely get covered up, I don't think they look quite as satisfying made with graphite pencil or normal drawing pencil as they do with coloured pencils, but it's entirely up to you, of course. So I'll just get my reference on here. I took a photograph of the stone from the same direction as the camera is facing, so that I draw what you can see here. Just trying to take the same sort of procedure as I did with the oil pastel drawing. think what I'm getting the feel of with this is that the soft pastel is going onto the paper much more easily without requiring so much pressure. Use it on its edge. You can use the end just to give different textures, whatever you like. And you can see quite clearly the texture of the paper showing through, but you can also apply extra pressure and fill the little hollows like I did with the oil pastel to make a more dense area of colour, or white in this case. It goes on much faster. It's less work in a way. And of course you can blend these really very easily. I know people do like to do quite a lot of blending with their fingers, or you can get those pieces of, it's just like a solid cylinder made of reconstituted paper, and you can rub the surface with that, especially if you find your finger is too blunt at the end to get into the detailed areas. A lot of people like to use those, but I quite like to have the marks showing in the drawing, and I think it's important to be careful not to overdo the rubbing and smudging, otherwise you can end up with perhaps rather a smeary looking drawing. Once again, I'm just losing edges because I'll be able to find them again by adding darker or lighter tones. There's that darkest shadow. So it's blue, I can warm it up with a bit of the brown. And that quite easily covers it as well. The more I press with the soft pastel, the more it covers the colour underneath, so that's not the same at all as the oil pastel. If I want the colours to mix together, I have to use them quite lightly, or blend them together like that with my finger. So the smudginess is quite nice, but for me, I don't want to overdo that. And the same as with the oil pastel, the colour of the paper has an effect on the drawing. Even if you fill the hollows of the paper quite a lot, you can still see the difference if you've used white paper compared to using a coloured paper or a toned grey paper. Of course, the other thing that I'm seeing that you can't see is down here there's a great collection of pastel dust. So that is an advantage of working upright, is the dust all falls off your drawing. If you're working with the soft pastel flat, the dust will build up on the surface of the drawing, and sometimes it's hard to see what you've actually done. So you need to tip it off every now and then if you're working with the drawing flat. I'm just using the yellow on its side to mix all those colours together. Actually rub it all over. Everything goes a bit lighter. It gives me what I like is like this sort of surface of dust to work into. It smudges it, but without sort of making it mushy. I always feel that smudging it with my finger makes it a bit mushy looking, a bit porridgey. But you do it if you like it. You should do it. Don't listen to me. Everyone's got their own preferences, of course. Beautiful to use. I don't use soft pastels very often. I don't know why really, because that's actually really quick and really satisfying. That's the nice white. There we are. Get that nice soft white. Really requires just the very lightest touch. This I feel is much more like drawing, whereas the oil pastel feels a bit like painting. So, I hope that helped. A sort of compare and contrast of the two different mediums. I've done some tracing and transferring techniques in other videos, so today I'm going to do another easy method of transferring a shape so that you don't have to spend all that time drawing it again if you want to do another version of a piece of artwork that you've already done, or if you want to use a photograph as a stencil. So, and it's not cheating. I think there is a feeling that tracing and transferring and stenciling may be cheating sometimes, but I always say it's only cheating if you pretend you didn't do it. But if you're straightforward and tell everybody this is what I did, it's not cheating, is it? It's just a method. So I've photocopied the drawing, which was done in charcoal and charcoal mixed with water. I spent quite a long time getting the profile, getting the shape of the profile sorted out. It was quite a lot of work drawing this shape. So instead of drawing it again and taking loads of time over it, I decided I would use this paper as this photocopy as a stencil. I'm just carefully cutting the shape I want to reproduce. Even cutting out, I feel, is like a method of drawing. Drawing with the scissors. It's just a different way of exploring the shape. It's like taking a very, very slow line for a walk. So I'm sort of referencing two artists here because, of course, Matisse used scissors to draw with in his collages. And the quotation about taking a line for a walk, I think it was Paul Klee, and I think he actually said a drawing is just a point taken for a walk. Or a dot taken for a walk. I think that was it. Right, I think I'll go, so I'm making decisions as I'm going along, rather than getting that wispy shape of hair. I'll just cut that off and go around the main block of hair. Okay. I can now use either this side or this side to apply the shape. And what I'm going to do is, I thought about it, what I could do is the background is going to be yellow and the profile is going to be drawn in purple. So I could either put yellow on this edge and smudge it onto the paper, or I could put purple onto this edge and smudge it onto the paper, or both. So I'm going to start with the purple, and I'm just using my oil pastel to apply some colour along the edge of the stencil. This is just photocopied on ordinary thin weight photocopy paper, but you could also use a thicker weight of thin card, which would make it a bit more robust. Let's see how well this works. So I'm just using my finger to push the pastel onto the paper. Looks like it's working quite well. Let's take it away and see. There we go. Quite satisfying really, that. Let's do it with yellow along the edge of the profile. Just match that up. Okay. And push that the other way. Now I can't see the yellow quite so well, but it is going. Oops, I don't think. That's where it would have been better with card, wouldn't it? Okay. So I've begun to build up the rest of the drawing using pastels without any further need to transfer over here, and I've started to discover the profile and the position of eyes, etc. Nose, mouth, where the neck comes in here, and then and filling in the background so the shape starts to come out. And then I also cut into the stencil a little bit more to pin down the position of the ear. So I've put some blue pastel round on the stencil on the ear and on the hair here. So this just gives me the position of the ear. These are just quick shortcuts to avoid having to do all the decision making and long-winded drawing all over again. And so what I shall do, continuing with this drawing, and then when this is finished I will do the soft pastel drawing using similar techniques and post them on as separate videos on YouTube. So there'll be this instructional video for subscribers, and then longer videos showing the whole process of doing both the drawings, which you can skip through. There'll be no narration, no editing, and so if you want to watch those to see how the drawing went, you can skip through bits without missing anything that I'm saying. So I'll finish this video here and continue the drawing in a separate video.